All right, the channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and today is the first installment of our 2024 Oscar movie marathon. We kind of introduced it at the beginning of our last episode where the nominations had just been announced, but now we're going to start talking about some of the Oscar nominated films that we've seen for this year, and we're both tracking our progress via spreadsheet, and we have a lot of movies that we've now both seen to get through. I'm currently at I just yesterday saw the last of the 10 Best Picture nominees, and so I've I started off with a lot done already, and I've made some good progress. But you've probably added the most to your percentage between the two of us since we started. So
Yeah, I'm
we're
actually pretty happy with. I mean, there's been years where I wouldn't have gotten to 40% of the movies, and I'm already there with a couple of big ones that I think can get me even further. Like,
mhm.
but you're almost at 80%, but
Yeah,
you started at like
yeah.
70.
I don't think it
Yeah,
was quite that high, but
yeah,
it was 60 something.
yeah.
But yeah, so I think that you had mentioned you were going to try a strategy where if you only have an hour, you normally would say you don't have enough time to watch a movie, but now maybe you can watch some of them in installments. Has that been working for you?
It has. I had some things just like with work or whatever this last week where I didn't even have that hour, but up
Mm,
until it had worked. Like Killers of the Flower Moon, like that was one that I tackled that way, right? Where I
mm-hmm.
watched it in like three 1 hour segments. I know it's not 3 hours, but I kind of like would back
Sure.
up and like I
Well, it
probably
is.
watched it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's 3 hours plus that one.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Well, yeah.
like
Then
three and a half that one.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I watched it over 3 days. And you and I kind of talked about this. Like it's not truly an episodic
Yeah.
movie, but it is episodic enough where there
That
are
one,
beats.
yeah, that one more than most kind of divides neatly into different acts that you could
Yep.
separate,
Yeah,
using
it was really
grace.
easy to be like, okay, like I'm not gonna stay up too late tonight. This is a good stopping point. I'll pick it back up tomorrow.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that one worked good. I had actually the holdovers worked a little different. I had planned to watch it that way, but I was able to get started a little earlier than I normally have like my hour block to watch TV.
Mm-hmm.
So I started a little earlier. So it was like, okay, if I just extend a little later, it's not absurd, and I get to watch it all in one night. So,
Sure.
but what it did was it didn't make me not turn on the movie because I didn't have the time to commit to it, right? Like I knew that I could turn it off after an hour and be
Mm-hmm.
good with my strategy. I made the decision because I was only going to go like 20 or 30 minutes over because I got to start 20, 30 minutes early.
So it seems like a strategy that is effective in more than one aspect in that way.
Yes. So
Uh,
I've been happy with that, and I think that
Great.
has helped me um, because that was always my problem. Is like I don't start a movie
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know that I can stay up for it, or I'll start a movie and then I'll fall asleep because I can't stay up, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
like, so
Yep.
now I have a way to accommodate that.
All right. So
Let's talk about these movies.
there are now five of the Best Picture nominees that we have both seen, including Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, The Holdovers, Oppenheimer, and Killers of the Flower Moon. We've also both seen Elemental, which is nominated for Best Animated Picture, and I think that was all of them. Or was there one more that we'd both seen in some other way? I think that's it. Um,
For the animated.
Oh yeah. For no,
Yeah.
I meant in total. There's the five best pictures, and then there's Elemental. And was there another one that wasn't those?
Oh, like down farther.
Yeah, I feel like that was it, but that's yeah, I think that's it.
I believe that is it. But go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, that's all
I'll
right.
kind of scroll through it while you
Sure.
segue into what we're going to talk about.
We certainly could just get into them alphabetically, unless you've got one that's just racing to get out of your mouth. That sounds weird, but you know what I mean.
No, I mean, I think it's
Okay.
fine to get through
All
them
right.
alphabetically
Well,
and kind
let's,
of talk about them and what they're nominated for and what we
yeah. All
agree with
right.
that.
Well, so then let's start with Anatomy of a Fall, which is a movie that is it's a foreign language film, but it's kind of like one third French, one third Dutch, one third English, something like that. I was trying to remember what that third. No, it's German, because
German.
her character is German, and so it's like the the dialogue throughout that movie kind of goes back and forth because it is her character is German as first language, and then she marries a man who for whom French is their first uh, his first language, and together they both speak English. So there's a lot of all three languages in the movie. But the premise of that movie is that we have this family, husband and wife, and a child, a young son who is visually impaired, and he goes out for a walk one day, the son does, and when he comes back he finds that his father is dead from a fall from either the window or balcony of the house, and he is dead. And then as things develop, the police begin to suspect that the mother actually killed him rather than it being an accidental fall. And most of the movie essentially involves the the building to the trial, and then the trial of the mother for the murder of her husband. And it is not like exclusively but frequently kind of through the perspective of the son, who is in a position of, he wasn't there, and there are a lot of things that because he is a kid that they kept from him. So what does he think happened? And
Yep.
and so that's the basic premise of this movie. Um, I I thought it was really interesting as kind of a combination procedural slash character study. Um,
Yeah, I think that's part of why it's nominated, right? Like
mm-hmm.
it's got a little bit of a couple of different things, and then the sort of, I mean, it feels like those kind of like the there's a lot of TV series like in Europe that kind of focus on these police procedurals.
Mm-hmm.
They're similar to Law and Order, but they have a lot more of this like texture to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what this really kind of puts on steroids with the different languages and like
Mm-hmm.
just the setting. Like I don't know, it just kind of has all of that stuff, and then the whole like and I mean obviously we get into spoilers here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, I mean we don't have to. It's more just
well, but
that
it's an important
right.
thing for me
Yeah.
to try to understand because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I left it with the way that it ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
So,
shorthand,
spoiler warning for anyone who
yeah,
has not seen
spoiler
Anatomy
warning.
of a Fall. Yeah.
Shorthand, they think he actually might have overdosed on aspirin and felt like hurt, like, and that had something to do with it because the dog.
So here's my understanding of what happened is that um, they thought it was unlikely that it was an accidental fall, because if he, if it was a fall and not, there's one theory where she hit him over the head and he fell over the balcony. There's
Right.
another theory where he fell out of the attic window, but it seems unlikely that that would have been accidental because he was doing work in the attic but not in that spot, and you really kind of would have had to work at it to fall out of that window. And so there was theories that it wouldn't have been didn't seem likely to be an accident. So the question then was, is it possible that he committed suicide?
Right.
And given that no one else had any sort of reason to expect him to maybe do that, it becomes a question of like, is that a theory that is only because you can't justify the accident and you're just trying to come up with any explanation other than that she killed him, right? And so she, in being pressed with this, because she says at the beginning that she didn't think that that's what it was. She assumed it must have been an accident because she wouldn't have expected that he tried to commit suicide, and frankly was not in favor of going that route with the defense until her attorney basically said, look, no one's going to believe it was an accident. I don't believe it was an accident.
Right.
So it's either that or that. And so she said she did remember a previous incident where she thought he had gotten really drunk. He was acting very sick. And she saw that when he had thrown up, there were little white things in it. And she found a bunch of empty aspirin blister packs in the trash. And so maybe that was an example of a previous attempt that didn't, wasn't successful, wasn't completed, I suppose is that. And so in that sense, in her attempt to try to say, well, here is maybe some evidence that that is something that he might have done, is this previous incident that was months before. But the problem
Which
is,
then ties into like, I was trying to like, anyway, go ahead.
yeah, but the problem, of course, is that she doesn't have anyone else to vouch for that occurring at all, right? She cleaned it up. Nobody else saw it. At least that was the argument of the prosecution. And so it's easy for them to say, how do we know you're not just making that whole thing up, right? But what we have with the kid is him remembering in around that timeline his dog acting really mysteriously sick. And his dad, the next day, taking the dog to the vet, having a very strange conversation with him that on one hand could have been kind of a dark, cynical way to try to tell a kid that, we don't know if your dog's going to be okay or not. You might need to be okay with that, right? You might be, but also there was some strangeness to the conversation. And so the kid is trying to say, why did that happen? Why was my dog sick at that time? Is it possible that the dog ate some of the dad's vomit with the pills in it? And so the dog was sick because he ate some of the pills, which means that the incident did happen, right? And so this is where he decides to try to see what happens if he gives aspirin to the dog, and it's much worse than he expected. And so it's scary for a little bit there, with whether his dog's going to be okay or not. And he's feeling like, oh my God, I didn't realize it was going to be so bad. But it also, for him, suggests that his mom is telling the truth about that incident, which means maybe his dad did kill himself instead of her killing him.
Right. So yes, that is the more detailed, accurate version of.
Well, so
I was trying to get to like
okay.
But yes, and I'm glad you did all that because does offer really good context, especially if we're going to do spoilers, right? Like now we have there's actually a piece to it, but the idea is, so what I was trying to figure out is with one of the things that I found interesting, and I'm asking you, did I find this interesting because I put something on it, or does it think the movie was saying this? So when the kid testifies about the aspirin incident, ultimately she gets acquitted. They go home. They have kind of a weird, like, they're both afraid of, like, it's like this weird, like, I was afraid you were gonna, when you come home, and I was like, they didn't like gel, like the mom and the kid, right? And then she goes up, and the end of the movie is her with the dog looking at Samuel's photo. And I was trying to, like, was the movie trying to be ambiguous of, like, I killed him and got away with it?
I think that the
Or
movie,
I'm sad that he killed himself and the dog, thank you for saving me. Or was it just kind of leaving it there for us?
I
Yeah.
have the impression that the movie is sort of really steadfastly saying, we're not going to tell you which one is true.
That's okay. Yes, that's
because it all comes down to, there's a period when, before he decides to do this test with his dog, the son is feeling conflicted because he is actually starting to kind of think over the course of the trial, maybe my mom really did do it.
Right.
And he's
Which is
having to
why they have
reckon
that
with
awkward.
what does that mean for him, right? Because if she's convicted, now not only is his dad dead, but his mom's in jail, and what happens to him now? But you could imagine the scenario of like, but do you, so what does he even want to have happen if that's what he thinks, right? But he's not sure. He can't be sure. He's in this position of saying, well, but how do I know? And I think it's interesting because there's some initial expectation that this court appointed observer who's staying with them explicitly to make sure that the mom is not putting pressure on the kid to testify in a certain way, like to lie on her behalf or whatever. And I think there's this initial expectation that there's going to be kind of an adversarial relationship between this social worker and the mom. But I think the social worker ultimately, I wonder if it even would be considered proper from her employers, but she does the human thing, which gives him what I think is good advice in that circumstance for him, which is to say, there are going to be times in life where there is absolutely no way to be sure one way or the other. And you kind of have to just pick one and decide to believe it. Because you can't live in that uncertainty. But there's no way to know for certain. You really have to choose.
So I wasn't going to bring that line up but I just put it out there just because we obviously have done some of these types of movies. Like, I felt that was a religious nod. Like, I felt like that was kind of what I was going towards. Like,
Well, it's similar to.
not explicitly, but just like kind of bringing that in, right? Because that's
Yeah,
kind of how it
I
is.
could
Like, just
see. Well,
pick.
yeah, I could see that, especially in the sense that that's the end of Life of Pi, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, you choose the story you like better. You know,
right.
yeah. So I think that it's not necessarily given an explicitly religious overtone here, but certainly you could approach it that way.
It certainly wasn't. No, and I guarantee it wasn't. But I
Hmm.
sort of read it of that. Like, that's how
Yeah.
I kind of. It's like, yeah,
Hmm.
it's true. Like, if you're not, because
But
I've heard that, like, anyway,
yeah,
there's a
but as far as the ending is concerned, I feel like the movie is sort of, in the objective sense, it is steadfastly refusing to tell us one way or the other.
That's
It
okay.
puts
That's
us,
what I thought too.
yeah.
And that's why I brought it up with, like, when we were talking about like the nice mix of procedural and character study and all
Hmm.
that, is that it, but by you affirming that we both saw the same thing there, like,
Hmm.
that's part of the genius of this movie, is that, like,
Yeah.
it's such a good procedural, and like these are the things that happened,
Hmm.
but we don't know what actually happened.
I will say that in my own mind, even though the movie is not committing either way, I tend to believe she didn't do it and he did kill himself because
And I left with that she did,
okay. See,
and she knew, and that's why she had the dog, because she knew, like, that was how she was going to get out of it, was
well,
the dog. Yeah.
maybe, but it's interesting. I honestly, I think what it was for me is when they were trying to give their whole forensic analysis, and they're showing how, like, well, here's how the blood drops, and they're showing, like, he's bent halfway back over the railing and she's leaning out over the railing with him to hit him on the
Oh
head, and
yeah.
I'm saying I don't buy that with her and him on that
Yeah.
balcony. Like, I that does not look likely to me. I don't
No, you're
believe
right.
that's
At that
how
point,
it
you're right.
happened. Yeah,
But I
and
think that's how the
yeah,
movie, like, kind of takes you on that roller coaster, because
yeah.
at that point I felt the same way, which is why I brought up the ending, because
Hmm.
the ending, which again, from the actress's perspective, like, she doesn't leave you
Yeah.
with much there
Well,
either, right? Like,
so
she's looking at his
interesting.
photo, but it's
Yeah,
like this sort of like lingering, like, do I
yeah,
miss him, or am I just
yeah.
like glad this
So
is gone? Yeah.
but like a lot of the movie too is just interesting in the way that through the distorting lens of the trial, all of the dirty laundry that these two would normally be keeping between them because it's private in their own relationship becomes necessary to expose for everybody in this distorted, twisted way. And the kid is having to sit through all of that. And I say having, he chooses to. He's proactively insisting on watching the whole trial. And I think it's because he wants to know. He wants to know what he thinks happened, right? He doesn't want to wonder. But
Right, well,
so,
because he's wanting the same thing that
mhm,
what you just talked about before. He wants to know that if his mom goes to prison, she deserved to go to prison because she did it, and
mhm,
that's even though it
right,
will suck for him, he can at least be okay with that.
right,
Or if she comes home, he wants to be sure she is completely absolved of it
right.
so that feels safe in his own home, which is why their homecoming is
Yeah.
also kind of weird because he doesn't actually feel that
Well,
way.
and not only that, well, I had the feeling that he was more or less doing what the social worker said and choosing to believe that she didn't do it. However, the problem with interpreting his emotions at that point is that still means his dad killed himself,
Hmm?
and had to go through the whole trial. And so, like, it's sad either way, and there's going to be an element of just like coming down from the heightened emotions of the trial regardless. And so I think his emotions are going to be complicated no matter what, but I had the impression that he was choosing to believe. But I actually wanted to kind of just touch on what it's nominated for.
Let's
um,
do that and kind of
yeah,
wrap into
so
the
it's
next one.
nominated
Yeah.
for Best Picture. Justine Triet, the director, is nominated for Best Director. Sandra Hüller is the mother, and she is nominated for Best Actress. Interestingly enough, she is also the wife and mother of the family in The Zone of Interest.
Nice.
Um,
She was great. So if we're and so was the director. I mean, that
yeah,
was
I mean
I think I
it's
heard
yeah,
I think I heard it described one point as like almost Hitchcockian, right?
yeah, I could see that. There's definitely some Hitchcock influence there. The Best Original Screenplay is nominated by Justine Triet, the director, and Arthur Harari. And then I think Best Editing.
It's
Um,
deserving of all those things. And if we're
where is this? Yeah, best editing. So it's yeah. So, picture, director, actress, screenplay, editing. Yeah, that's it. So 5 nominations for that one. And I think it's solid on all of those fronts, but certainly has a lot of strong competition as well.
you know,
All right.
but to the point of if we're looking at where the snubs may have been.
Mm-hmm.
Not again, we haven't done all of them, but we can chalk this off as like, okay, this lady has earned her director and this lady has
Mm-hmm.
earned her best actress.
Right.
Regardless, was it better or worse
Well,
than
especially in
Barbie?
context of, yeah, Barbie is our next movie alphabetically, so
Yep.
let's go ahead and just jump there. So we kind of touched on this controversy at the end of our last episode of just my own feeling of like, yes, I think that maybe Greta Gerwig deserved a Best Picture or Best Director nomination. Maybe Margot Robbie deserved a Best Actress nomination, but I don't think that it's necessarily a snub that they didn't get one when there were lots of other, really well, there's a lot of competition in those categories, and so.
There
Um,
is, and this one in particular, the reason why I brought up Anatomy of a Fall is
mm-hmm,
because it's not as popular of a movie like in
mm-hmm,
the general public.
yeah,
And one of the things that is always leveraged against Greta Gerwig is that she was not nominated because she's a woman. Well, this is a competitive category, and there is a woman nominated. Not to
mm-hmm,
say that Greta couldn't also have been nominated, but
yeah.
like
I
it's not like they excluded women from this category.
Right. Well, and also, like as we touched on, America Ferraro is nominated for Best Supporting Actress in Barbie.
Right.
Yeah, and so I can understand very well the impulse that people have, that a lot of people saw and really loved Barbie, and I was one of them because it's a great movie. But you do often get a large number of people who want the one movie they saw to win everything,
Yes.
and didn't necessarily see all the competition, but have strong feelings nonetheless on who they thought should have been nominated. And again, they're not wrong to have an opinion, but I do start to pull away a little bit when they want to try to assert some systematic bias against it
Yes,
as
and
the
I
reason.
and I will say there is the Barbie people knew what they're doing with the nominations because they made sure Ryan Gosling got put in as best supporting actor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like because he could have really gone either way. I mean, I get like Margot Robbie is Barbie, right? So
Hmm.
she is Best Actress, but
Yeah.
like Ryan Gosling is probably has almost equal screen time, maybe not quite,
Yeah, I would
but
say probably not quite, but I agree with you that
you could make an argument that he was
yeah,
the main actor in the movie.
yeah. There was
So
certainly no one who is more of a lead actor than him.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was Ken enough to be the main
Enough.
actor,
Yeah, he's enough.
but enough, but they put him in as supporting actor,
Hmm.
which he probably wouldn't have gotten this nomination if he was running against the best actor category, right?
Yeah.
And so
Right. And so
anyway,
I
let's talk about the movie.
Barbie got 8 nominations. It was not
Yes.
snubbed just because it didn't get certain specific ones. And so that's my own take. I don't want to tell people they're wrong, but and certainly Hollywood has historic systematic biases, but I don't think that's the case in this specific
Yes.
instance.
And my last thing on this before we move on with
Sure.
it, like with the Greta Gerwig thing in particular, like, yes, you want to win Best Director, but if you are the director of a film that won 8 things, like you got to feel pretty good
Well,
that you did your job and you put your people in position to succeed. Like as somebody who's in a leadership position,
mhm,
I'd rather 8 of my people win awards and my job like function win the award than me personally.
mhm.
So I'm not Greta Gerwig, but I think that's pretty successful,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, Gerwig is the director of this movie. Margot Robbie is not only the lead, but she's also one of the producers. So, like,
Right, so they can
yeah.
win Oscars.
Yeah, obviously, so it's one of those
Anyway,
things. So I think people it's good to like and root for a movie that you really enjoyed, but I think sometimes people need to chill out a little bit and put what the Oscars
let's talk
are
about what
into
we enjoyed
perspective.
about it, not
All
what
right.
people are
So, well, it's
doing to
nominated
go.
for it is nominated for best costume design, best production design, 2 original songs for both I'm Just Ken and What Was I Made For. Um,
And that's going to be a tough. I love both those songs.
they're both pretty good. It is nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. Notably, it's adapted and not original because the rule is if it's based on an existing IP, Barbie, then it's automatically adapted even if the whole thing is written from scratch.
Yep.
But best, yeah, screenplay. And then Best Supporting Actor, Ryan Gosling. Best Supporting Actress, America Ferrara. And then Best Picture. So uh, it is a very fun movie. Costumes and production design are, really fantastic just in the realization of what Barbie Land is like. Um, the performances are just super fun. Um, it managed.
I really hope it wins best costume design. I mean, I know these other ones
Mm-hmm.
like Killers of the Flower Moon, like I mean these period pieces, like they were
Yeah.
really good, but like this just had it.
Poor
It
Things
got
is the only one that's not just a period piece.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in a weird way, it is because it's taken like an 80s 90s that has continued on as a
Mm-hmm.
toy, but it's taken an 80s toy
Mm-hmm.
and put that costume design into this fantasy land
Yeah.
of today. Like that's pretty damn good.
Well,
you
not
know?
to mention the idea of taking classic real world Barbie outfits and fitting them to actual real human beings.
Yes, another great point.
Yeah, so like just all of the visual stuff, just the realization of Barbie Land is just so fun. Um, uh, all the whole cast is just hitting on all the cylinders. I think Kate McKinnon is Weird Barbie. Ryan Gosling obviously, but also Simu Liu as one of the other Kens, his the main other competition Ken, um, and just there's just a lot going on there, and it's just a lot of fun. I feel like if I was going to nitpick, I think some of the stuff at the Barbie headquarters with them running around cubicles and stuff feels kind of weirdly not entirely like the same movie, but it's not a big deal. It's still entertaining, plenty entertaining while it's happening. Um, it's
it felt like it was like trying to be a throwback to like 80s Mattel kind of
Well,
thing.
I think where it feels like it's a little bit strange to me is only in the sense that if you are establishing there's Barbie Land and there's the real world, but the real world is inconsistently grounded, that's a little bit strange, right? Because it's
Right.
one thing to say, oh, in the real world, people act realistically and they're not stereotypes like stereotypical Barbie, right? But also that they have Scooby Doo chases in the middle of a corporate headquarters.
But is that maybe something the movie was trying to say to us? Is that like like
This is not a big complaint.
stereotypes in the real world? Yeah, I don't know if it was that
Well,
deep. Yeah, or
I
just trying to be funny.
yeah, I think it was just trying to be funny, and I don't really object to it. It's a nitpick, not a nitpick, not a complaint, really. But and then ultimately, when it gets down to kind of like what is the big, the message of it, I think it's recognition of the complexities of being a woman in modern society and all of that is not any material that has not been covered in other movies before, but I think it is nicely distilled down for both a young and a mainstream audience, and it feels good. It's a good time. It's a fun movie.
Yeah, and I will say in there it's like I mean I kind of fit a lot of the straight male like stereotypes. Like yeah, I mean I I think there's enough of a nod to like some of like the difficulties of that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like it's not the main point,
yeah.
but like I know it's done for humor, but like Ken going and like being in Barbie Land completely submissive to Barbie,
Mm-hmm.
going learning about this patriarchy where men get to be superior
Yeah.
and then misappropriating that into just some bro frat house shit. Like that's kind of a funny journey. And
Yeah,
then like
absolutely. Yeah,
you
no,
know,
I agree completely.
because I feel it like
Mm-hmm.
I would love a Mojo Dojo Casa house. Like
Yeah.
I, I would also love Barbie to be by my side in the end, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
it's conflicting. Like
Yeah.
that sounds fun. It was fun when I was 25. I my fraternity house probably was a Mojo Dojo Casa house, right? Like yeah. And that and I honestly thought that was some of the best production design was the sort of like
Yeah.
incongruous because Barbie Land is so like it's organized and here you have this version of this house
Right.
and these guys just sort of like threw a bunch of bro shit together and that's where they were living like
Mm-hmm.
and to do that I think almost takes more talent like to make it still look cool right
Mm-hmm.
like as any of
Yeah.
us could do that
Sure.
like
Yeah.
but like the horse stuff and
Well,
like
like that was like again, this is not a complaint, but it did just seem a little bit weird to me that they chose horses as a thing that guys like. And I'm like, I mean, there's lots of Barbie horse stuff. It seemed like a weird specific choice to have that be one of the things he fixates on, but it's again, I'm not complaining.
because it's well I think it was like again I think that is an actually more complex thing is that like
Hmm.
horses were appropriated in Barbie world as like Barbie's thing. It's like we like horses too. Like that can't be just a girl thing.
I
Like
mean,
horses
it's
are
kind of
cool.
presented as a guy thing, but
But that's what I'm saying.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
think you're supposed to
mm,
know that like
yeah,
I don't know. I felt like that was like part of the thing is that
sure.
like you knew if you're a Mattel fan, you
Hmm.
knew a My Little
I
Pony,
mean,
Barbie horse
certainly
stuff.
him gravitating towards the whole like Marlboro Man sort of thing.
Yeah,
But they didn't want to
wanted to be a
have it be
cowboy.
about cigarettes. He wants to be a cowboy. Yeah, no,
Yes.
I get that. Yeah. But
Mhm.
yeah, so it's uh certainly a movie
And
that I
because
think.
here's my other
Oh yeah.
piece of like why I think that makes sense
Hmm.
is that he's also wearing like her fur coat as like his like cape,
Mm,
right? Like so he's appropriating Barbie stuff in a manly way.
yeah, yeah.
That's how I took it, which is why I think that part was like genius to the point where like I wanted to be like that Ken for Halloween. Well, and I actually and very good, thankfully a nice compliment for my wife. She actually said you could be that. for Halloween. You could take my like faux fur coat and you could do that. I was like, I could be Ryan Gosling for Halloween. She's like, no, you can, but yes. Didn't end up doing it, but I appreciated it. Yeah.
But yes, definitely a very fun movie. I feel like we probably could talk more about it, but it's also probably one of the more discussed movies in the broader culture
Yep.
already. But yeah, very good. I mean, I liked it. I probably wouldn't vote for it as the best picture, but deserving as a nomination, absolutely.
Yes. I hope it gets the costume design, uh, maybe some of the others. I don't know, production
Well,
design
yeah,
stuff
production
a lot.
design is, it's oddly enough, it's up against Poor Things for both of those. Which, when if we talk about Poor Things at all, it's weird that there's actually a lot of overlap between them in that way. I heard one person sort of succinctly describe Poor Things as horny Barbie, and if you've seen both, that's actually extremely funny. I mean, it's one thing is you can kind of just imagine it having only seen one or the other, but it's it's there's a lot more thematic overlap than people might realize.
Is Poor Things available outside of the theater? Like at home?
I think it's still in theaters. I'm not sure when it comes to streaming. I saw it in the theater. I
Because
know it's still
it's
playing in
available at
some
home.
theaters anyway.
Well, if it was available at home, I was gonna say I'll just go watch that tonight
Hmm.
then.
I liked it a lot. I honestly personally put it over Barbie, partly just because it's doing other things that I also really like. But like, that's not a dig on Barbie. It's just we got two really good movies on similar themes this year. Um, so let's go ahead and go to our next alphabetical movie though, and that is The Holdovers. This is a movie with starring Paul Giamatti about a teacher at a boarding school that gets punished with the duty of staying with the kids who don't have anywhere to go over holiday break, and he ends up connecting with a young man who is having difficulty with his own family and finding his own place in the world. And the two of them together are also accompanied by a woman who works at the school but has recently lost her son because he was in the military, and it's them hanging out and getting to love each other, and that's it basically. I mean,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean
yeah.
it's not the deepest movie. Like
Mm,
it's not shallow, but
no,
it's not like trying to
it's
say
it's a
anything.
feel good for sure. Like
Yeah,
it's like there's drama and stuff in it, but it's overall I think not really very challenging. Like
right.
I love it. I really love this one, and so I'm not criticizing it at all, but I certainly will agree with you that it's not like groundbreaking or transgressive. It's kind of just
It's just
you
a
know
really well made movie,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's just really
Yeah,
solid.
like
It's directed by Alexander Payne of
which I
uh,
didn't realize that until I was like halfway through it, and I was like, this is the Sideways guy. Like it's definitely the same guy. Like it just caught me, and
mm-hmm.
and I went and looked it up, and I was like, yep,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah. One of the other things I had that reaction halfway through it was this was before we'd gotten any snow in here in Massachusetts this year, and it was such a snowy winter there. It was like, oh, I miss it. I miss the snow. But in any case, I I really enjoyed it. I read an article that was dismissive and critical of it because they thought that it was ultimately kind of a cynical pandering movie about realizing that you're special and not like everybody else. And I feel like I don't really think that is what it's about. I don't think that's what it's about at all. And in fact, like part of what he was criticizing was how mean of a teacher that this guy is, and therefore we shouldn't be like as sympathetic of him as the movie seems to think. And I would argue that like the movie knows that he's not doing a good job as a teacher, and it's one thing for him to resent being sort of punished and criticized by people, but at the same time, he is being too mean. And it's because, as we realize over the course of the movie, he really shouldn't be there anymore. He has literally stayed a teacher long past the point where it is entirely soured for him, and he's doing a bad job because he has been too scared to take the step that would maybe really make him happy.
Yep.
And so the catharsis of the movie is him recognizing, by having it kind of forced on him, that he shouldn't be a teacher anymore. Not that he was really actually a good teacher all along, even when he was being mean. He was being mean because he was a mismatch. He was unhappy where he was.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah,
I think that's more of what it was, is that
Yeah.
like, to take a thing from like with a different discussion we were having earlier, like people are complicated. That's kind of what it's trying to say. Like people are complicated, they belong in different things, like
hmm
that, everybody is special in the fact that everybody's unique,
hmm
and you want to just align your where you need to be with where you are, and sometimes that doesn't happen and it leads to bad outcomes. But good can come from that,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the complicated part, is that he impacted Angus even though he was a bad teacher and shouldn't be
hmm
a teacher anymore. He still had an impact on that kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he had the impact on that kid because they got locked up as human beings, not
Right.
because of the teacher student.
It's classic stuck in an elevator bottle episode plot. You know what I mean? It's like these characters don't like each other, but then they're forced to hang around each other, and in the process, they get to know each other better, and then they like each other, right? Like this is classic, tropey plot stuff, which doesn't make
Super
it
trophy
bad.
plot stuff.
It's classic because it works, especially when it's executed so effectively like it is in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other tropey thing. Rich kids don't have everything. Like their lives aren't perfect just
hmm
because they're rich and go to private school. Like, oh, but they played it in a way that like felt genuine, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and some of the, like it's one thing to imagine that like even rich kids have problems, but like some of the problems aren't necessarily even the ones you would expect. Like, part of, what it is for Angus is we discover over the course of the movie that his dad has been hospitalized for mental illness. And there's some initial question of like, well, was that actually the right thing for him? But also like what happens if you go visit him? um how does that feel? Is that the best thing for him? But also for Angus, there's always going to be this underlying, what if that happens to me?
right. And that's
And
how,
yeah.
right. And so that's why he acts out, right?
hmm
Because he's got this like,
yeah,
well,
not to mention the
it's
fact
not
that
a direct linear
yeah,
like I'm
yeah,
screwed anyway, but like
yeah.
there is that I might be screwed anyway in
hmm
this mental health thing. So like anytime I feel a crazy impulse, like I might as well just do it.
hmm
To the point where he like does a gymnastics trick into the floor and
yeah,
breaks his arm and has to go to the hospital. Yeah.
yeah.
Or
um
just or whatever he
yeah,
did. Yeah.
I think it was dislocated, but yeah. But the uh yeah, there's just, it's, as we mentioned, like the plot is not treading any new ground, but that's okay because it's really just constructed to be a really well executed example of the form. You know what I mean? And it's a feel good, and it works because it makes you feel good. The characters are funny, and it turns sympathetic. I like everybody, um, and it's good. And one
Well,
little,
and honestly, I feel like it's actually there's a the best example I could come up with with some of the things that happen in this movie, like this is gonna sound really weird, but it's almost like Deep Blue Sea of like we're acknowledging what we're doing in
hmm
such a weird way. Like when the dad shows up and helicopters all the other kids to fucking Switzerland,
uh huh,
like that was kind of like, all right, we know what we're doing here,
yeah,
right? Like we're being silly. The rich guy comes in and oh, you're still screwed because like
yeah,
we're gonna lead to that, like why you have the dad mom
hmm
problem, you can't get your paperwork signed, but like that was
hmm
silly,
yeah.
and they knew it was silly.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I agree completely. One other detail that I think could almost be a throwaway thing, but I actually really kind of fixated on it as an interesting choice, is that the Paul Giamatti character has a lazy eye. And it becomes at a couple of points a bit of a dialogue point of like which is the one to look at, so to speak, right? Um, but I am 100% convinced that they literally switch it over the course of the movie. There are some scenes where it's the left eye and some scenes where it's the right eye. I believe that they on purpose went back and forth with it.
I I can't deny that
Yeah,
because
I
until they first brought it up,
mhm.
I didn't actually realize that that was happening. I it
Oh
just
yeah.
that was not a thing I was noticing.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like an important thing, but it was more just a matter of like, uh, one, especially once they introduce it, they are inviting the audience to try to figure it out, right?
And to the same point of like the
Mhm.
like the wink at the audience thing, like I feel like they probably were doing that just to
Mhm.
make it like,
Yeah, no, that's exactly. This is why I mentioned it right after you were talking about your thing,
okay, yeah,
because
that makes sense.
I'm
Yeah, yeah,
I'm saying they are playing with the audience in that respect.
yeah.
But yeah, I think I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's nominated for Best Picture, and let's see what else. Paul Giamatti as the teacher for Best Actor. Um, Divine Joy Randolph, who is the cook that I mentioned, who had lost
Mhm.
her son. She is Best Supporting Actress. She's
She was very
wonderful. Yeah.
good.
Best Original Screenplay by David Hemmingson, and I think that might be it. Might be it might have like editing too or something here. I'm scrolling down. Um, yes, and best film editing. So a total of 5 nominations for The Holdovers.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't know that this movie is going to win any of them,
Hmm.
and I'm okay with that. Like, it's it may be not the best in any of these
Yeah.
categories, but it's certainly a pretty good movie all put together.
I mean, depending on the day, I had considered thinking to voting for it just because it's like I think I may have just had like just straight up just personal enjoyment might have been my favorite in that regard. But
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah,
So, but we'll see. Yeah, I would say it's if it were to win, I don't know because I think in an ordinary year, I would see it maybe as being able to win because it's just sort of the feel good one everyone can agree on sort of thing, right? But this year also has the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon, which is really going to throw that compass off. Speaking of Oppenheimer, that is actually the next movie alphabetically.
yeah. I've been waiting to get to this one.
Oh yeah.
Well, because you've made a couple of comments via text and in conversation that you've cooled on it. I'm curious what's happened because I still think this is the best movie I saw this year.
Well, so it should be taken as a matter of degree. I still think it's a good movie. I think it's one of like I have a handful of Christopher Nolan movies that I really like, including The Dark Knight and The Prestige. Probably would be top 2, maybe Memento in there. But he's also done a handful lately that I have just not been as into, like Interstellar and Dunkirk and Tenet. And I am not always a big Nolan booster, but I would definitely put Oppenheimer in the top half of his overall filmography, in my opinion. And I think it is a great movie, so I don't want to overstate things, but it's more just a matter of compared to how I felt when I first saw it, and now I would say I cooled on it some, and that might just be broader context of like what other movies I'm comparing it to and that sort of thing. I think it's great, but I'm not even really sure what it is about it that makes me feel that way. I mean, it's not like there's a specific plot point that I thought more about now I don't like it or anything like that.
Right.
I think that it does have what is, I think, a common Christopher Nolan problem, which is that the female characters are not as strong as the rest. Um,
That that's a definitely a fair criticism of the movie.
yeah.
Yep.
Um, and I think there's some interesting stuff that they're doing with them, but I think it overall ends up feeling like a very small part of what the movie's doing. And that's, I mean, a movie does not have to be feature a complex, strong female character in order to be good. For just as an example, I rewatched this week Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World, which doesn't even have a female character in the whole movie. So, like, I mean, but the point just being, if they're there, I so I would say that's maybe some of the weaker part of the movie. But there's a lot that I really
But
like.
also, I mean, part of the point is that Oppenheimer had complex relationships with the females in
Yeah.
his life,
Hmm.
and he was, and the movie is about his perspective.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
No,
I'm not saying you're wrong, but
I
there is some defense of why you don't need to elevate that in this movie.
no, well, I'm not saying that we need to shoehorn them into more of the story than they would naturally be in, as much as I'm saying the parts where they are there are the weakest part of the movie, I think. And I don't think it's like the actress's fault. I think it's not, it's a pattern we have seen with other Christopher Nolan movies. Um,
Yes, and so when you look at it from that
yeah.
context, yeah, I hadn't thought
Yeah.
about
And
that.
again, like, this is not a huge criticism. I still think the movie's good, but I think it's part of why I have less of the blown away reaction than I did when I first saw it. Um
I
I
still feel like it was the best movie I saw this year. Like I,
It's very good. I really like the stuff that I did really like in it. First of all, like, Killian Murphy is great in it. Um I loved the use of makeup throughout. Just where they do use it and how they use it, I think really works. Especially given that they're covering a pretty broad period of this character's life.
yep.
I mean, it got, and also, part of where I might be criticizing it is in the context of understanding that it got more nominations than any other movie. It's getting its laurels, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so 13 nominations for this one. Just while I have it here, best film editing, best sound, best
All of those
makeup and
things.
hairstyling, best costume
Maybe,
design, best
maybe.
cinematography, best production
Yes.
design,
Yes.
best original score,
Maybe.
best adapted screenplay, best supporting actress for Emily Blunt, best supporting actor for Robert Downey Jr., best
Yes.
lead actor for Cillian Murphy, best director for Christopher Nolan, and of course, best picture. So, lots of nominations for Oppenheimer. It's doing okay. It doesn't need my full throated support.
Yes. And I think like when you were, I was just sort of commenting as you're reading through like the production design, the sound, the
Mm-hmm.
editing,
Mm-hmm.
100% in my opinion, like all of those things, like, and it's not just the bomb scene, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody talks about that. That's pretty cool. The fact that they made the bomb, they recreated the bomb without any electronic or computer effects, pretty damn cool.
Uh, you know, I oddly, this is not even a criticism, much less a complaint. I found that scene surprisingly anticlimactic.
That's the point.
I know, and that's what I'm kind of trying to get to, is that we're kind of primed by Hollywood to know what gigantic, especially nuclear explosions look like. I tell you, the scene though that just really blew me away, you know, just to use a figure of speech, is actually the scene where he's giving the speech afterwards, and you start getting the weird sort of film distortion effects, and the
Yes.
sound is cutting out weird because he's starting to kind of panic of like, oh,
What did you do?
what have I
Yeah.
actually done here? And
Yeah.
Yeah, that scene is incredible. I think that's
It's
probably my
incredible.
favorite
I
scene.
agree too. I agree with that too, and that was where I was going to go next. But I was going to say you nailed it on the bomb scene. Like that is it's the most powerful scene to me in the movie
Hmm.
because it reinforces everything they're talking about, right? Like this is like God destroyer of worlds, but it doesn't come with like this fire. It just come and just it doesn't look like you expect it to look. Like we
Hmm.
built a thing that is godlike. This isn't
Hmm.
us coming in and just like bringing 1,000
Yeah.
cannons and tanks
What I also
in a
really
really
appreciate
fast thing. Like
about
it sucks the planet apart. Like this bomb is nasty. you know.
Yeah, well, and I just loved all of what I did really like in that whole sequence is not to imply that I didn't like that the explosion was a little like deliberately not what we're expecting. But the just showing like all of the logistics of the planning, um, and just the very nature of how no one kind of really knows how what's going to happen. They don't know how big it is. It'll be it. There's the
At that
very
point,
very small near zero chance of igniting the whole atmosphere.
right,
Um,
we know it doesn't happen,
yeah,
but those actors
right.
and that tension that's
Hmm.
drawn in there, like
Yeah,
reminds us that that might actually, they are
right.
worried that might actually happen.
And yet they're doing it anyway.
Anyway, yes.
Yes, and so and that's ultimately like one of the things that I definitely had heard people say about it before I saw it and then didn't agree with as a criticism is that it's like lionizes Oppenheimer and his decisions. And I feel like I think that's a real misread of the movie. I mean, he certainly does not feel that way himself in the movie. Um, it is a strange choice that I think overall works, but it's not clear why they made the choice of pairing the bomb narrative with the framing device of the political stuff later. I think that's a surprising choice, and I don't hate it how it's put in there, but I do feel sort of like if it was still at a screenplay and they were asking me for notes, I would say, why did you do it like that? I mean, I think it works, especially because you've got some good performances in there, um, but it does like I think it puts some really interesting spin on the actual final reveal of like what was it that Oppenheimer and Einstein were talking about that day. And to have all of the business about the politics of it that wasn't even really even about the bomb anymore at that point, but literally just like I don't like you because I think you were talking about me behind my back, right?
Mhm.
And having it just all come down to maybe he was talking about something more important. And then we reveal that that is, in fact, what he was, and that it just highlights that maybe part of the reason that he was not fighting the political stuff as hard as he could have was because he was really, not able to fully defend himself. And maybe felt like there was some degree of like he deserved some of it, even if it's about something else, but also just the idea that he's really trying, at least in the movie version, to say, what can I do that will allow me to maintain as much ability as possible to blunt the impact of what I've done? And anything that, like, any crow I have to eat, any hearings I have to sit through, what gets to the outcome where I can mitigate as much as possible what I did.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of an interesting, like, it's a surprising choice, but it leads to just that final little turn right at the end where we go back to that scene. And I think it's a fantastic ending for sure.
It's an unbelievable
Mm-hmm.
ending that just like leaves you like we were leaving that movie and my wife's like she's like this is why I don't like watching movies like this with you. Like, it's like I had to think a lot more than I wanted to. And I'm not sure I understand it. I'm like, there's nothing to understand, babe. Like, it's not like you just, it's putting it out there for you. But
Hmm.
yes, that the ending and then the chain reaction of like, we already did this. And then that being the final special effects scene of
Hmm.
like, we actually really did ignite the
Yeah.
atmosphere. We just didn't do it the way we thought we meant to. Like,
Hmm.
that was so
Oh,
powerful.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will
Um,
say the last thing on the editing
hmm.
that I wanted to get to is the way that they edited in the black and white and the color versions of the movie and never told us why they were that way.
Hmm.
I made the assumption they were time based,
Hmm.
but then you get to a point where they aren't,
Yeah.
and it starts to be confusing, and you have to regulate it in your mind and understand, oh, they're perspective based. The black and white is Robert Downey Jr.'s, and the color is Cillian Murphy's, or the two characters.
Hmm.
That that I thought that was genius
Yeah.
because it it just made you work to
Hmm.
get what it was doing.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I agree. I think that was really cool. And so um, perhaps I'll just sum up with, again, restating from a perspective standpoint. When I say cooled on it, I mostly mean from being blown away to still just thinking it's really good, but maybe having some minor minor issues with it.
got it.
Um, but let's go ahead and move to the last of the Best Picture nominees alphabetically that we've both seen,
We
and
can
maybe
get we should be
yeah.
able to get through that close up today. You
Yeah,
think?
yeah. Oh, well, let's go ahead and let's do that one, and then maybe we can. I suppose the only other one we would talk about maybe is Elemental, but we're getting close to a time
That's
limit.
what I was just
Yeah.
looking at the
So
time.
let's
Yeah.
just do Killers of the Flower Moon, and then that can be it for this time. But so Killers of the Flower Moon, by contrast, and I think in some ways even saying that I cooled on Oppenheimer is almost specifically in comparison to, like, I paired them in my head because Killers of the Flower Moon is one that I liked when I first saw it, but had some um, reservations is the word I would usually use, but I don't. It sounds like a pun or something, so that's why I hesitated there. But um,
Get you. Yeah.
uh, it's one that I had some issues with initially, but then the more I thought about it, the more I those receded and I stopped having as much of an issue with them and liked it more in retrospect. And so I think in saying that I had cooled some on Oppenheimer, it was almost specifically in comparison that way, right? Like where I had like somehow I had to justify that if I like this one more over time, I like that one less, and it's not some a little irrational, but
So
regardless.
I will take that as well because Oppenheimer, what it does, the thought processes that you go through are so impactful that you kind of
Mm-hmm.
reflect on it like that day, the next 2 days, like you sort of work through like the ego, the argument, the politics.
Mm-hmm.
This movie, to your point, you watch it, and then there's like this slow burn of remembering and thinking of like when they talked about that and they did that. Like, yeah. So that makes a lot of
Mm-hmm.
sense. I still believe because of the power of what Oppenheimer did, it's a better movie, but like I get what you're saying now.
Yeah.
That makes yeah.
Yeah. So, Killers of the Flower Moon, just for anyone who's not familiar, is the Martin Scorsese movie talking about a real period of history where the Osage Native American tribe had been assigned some land by the U.S. government, and that land turned out to have a lot of oil on it, which made them very wealthy. But of course, um, as has been a repeated pattern in U.S. history, when a marginalized group gets money or anything good, you got to have, uh, white people get in there to start trying to work on taking it away from them. Um, and so that is kind of, we have Leonardo DiCaprio who enters the story as a sort of a loose relation to some of the people who are already there, and they absolutely bring him in and use him as a useful idiot to marry into one of these Native American families so that eventually they can steal their land rights out from under them. And I cannot off the top of my head think of a dumber character that Leonardo DiCaprio has played. This is not a criticism at all. It's a criticism of the character. How about that? Not the movie,
Yeah.
but
So
just
yeah, the only two that came to mind, because I thought the same thing, and I like
Ernest is
actually
pretty dumb.
thought
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
I thought back through it. Like obviously, like you can't use Gilbert Grape. That's not
It's a different thing.
right. Basketball Diaries. But that kid. But then I went back and thought, did a lot of dumb things. Very smart guy. Just made a lot of bad choices.
Mm-hmm.
And then the only other one that kind of came to mind was the Django and Chain guy. Like, but he's not dumb.
No,
He's
he's
just like simple in his like way, but he is
he's
more clever
lazy.
than
He's
yeah,
intellectually lazy. That guy.
intellectually lazy. That's a good
Yeah.
point.
But yeah, so Ernest, the character played by Leonardo DiCaprio in this movie, is easily manipulated by his uncle, played by Robert De Niro, and it manipulated into simultaneously marrying a woman, a Native American Osage woman that he seems to actually care for, and yet at the same time be actively helping subvert her interests and get her members of her family and other Osage killed in order to steal their oil rights, and somehow not really being astute enough to even really recognize the cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah,
He literally seems like in his head he has not even processed that there's a conflict there. You know, and it's strange in that regard. So what I'll say is that when I first saw it, my initial feeling of it was that even though I think the presentation of the Osage and the performances of all of the Osage characters are really good, and they had a lot of Osage involved with the production. I just really sort of felt like what I wanted more of watching it is more stuff from their perspective instead of only the perspective of the white characters seeing them. And then when I saw like the end sequence where it like summarizes it and gives it all title cards in the presentation of like a radio show, I just felt like this is weird and kind of indulgent, and Scorsese himself is in it. Why did he do that? And that felt strange to me. But having thought on it some more and read some more perspectives on it, I think what the movie is really trying to do in denying us those things, the perspective from those characters this is a movie being made, Martin Scorsese is a white man. I mean, he's Italian, I guess, but not Native American, certainly.
Yes.
And he is making a movie about the bad guys in the story. And he is not going to soften it and let people imagine themselves as the good ones that would actually do it right and oppose the bad racist people. He's saying, no, you don't get to be there. This movie does not have the evil racist whites and then the good ones that are nice.
Yeah, there's no white hero in this one.
Right.
Yeah.
Like even Jesse Plemons, who comes in and ends up being helpful in the end, is kind of, incidental, and it takes a lot of work to even get him there.
Yes.
But that kind of opened it up for me a little bit. And then the whole radio sequence at the end, they were pointing out that is Scorsese kind of nodding at and acknowledging the idea that even making a movie like this does in some ways reduce real human tragedy to an entertainment.
Yes.
And it's
That
like
I
nodding
thought
at
of that
that.
without even reading that. Like I was like,
Yeah.
they basically just said this is something that just went into the slideshows of history,
Hmm.
and this was a tragedy to these people, and it just went into like, here's what happened to the
Add it to the
Osage.
pile.
Yeah, like add it to the pile, you know. Yeah,
Hmm.
that one I caught that one, but it didn't.
Yeah.
But to your point, it didn't like resonate until a day or two later when I was
Hmm.
like, oh, because
Yeah.
I started thinking about like I started looking up the Osage, and I was like, why did he do? Oh, like that's the point, is that we took so much advantage of them as white Europeans.
Hmm.
They don't like they're not even in the popular conscience anymore.
Well, it reminds me of the Tulsa massacre, which is something that has gotten some more mainstream awareness in the last few years, from a variety of sources. But I sure know that was something I never learned about in school, because it's not a proud moment for America, for sure. And it's one of those. It's just, I think there are lots of examples of that in history, but at the same time, there's a reckoning with the idea that making real people's tragedy into a consumer product is something that, there is that layer of colonization to it, right? Puppies.
Yes,
Yeah,
this
see,
is the
if
bad
you're
one.
only listening to the audio, then you're missing out because we've got some good dog content on screen right now.
This is not a good dog content. This is
Aw.
bad dog content.
Aw.
Yeah, you had a bad dog.
I don't believe it. But yes,
Anyway,
so
keep going.
so I think there is. I've not entirely been able to let go of still feeling when I watch it like I want, like Lily Gladstone is so good about the character that Leonardo DiCaprio's character marries, but he is so awful throughout that I couldn't help feeling like I wanted more justification for why she doesn't figure it out sooner.
I
And
I feel like that was part of the thing, is that like they were so good at what at that awful thing,
mm-hmm,
that like, and they just betrayed them at a
yeah.
level that
Yeah, I think maybe it is that same impulse that they were sort of fighting against in framing the whole story this way, is they understand that there's an impulse in any audience watching this movie to want to place themselves in the shoes of the oppressed or the underdog in a situation, right? Like that is kind of how the movie medium works a lot of the time, right? And I think in some ways, although she is very good in the role, and I think there's a lot of great representation there, to begin with, I think it is perhaps still a conscious choice on Scorsese's part to try to resist the impulse to let the audience entirely put themselves in those characters' shoes. Wants to keep them saying it's uncomfortable, but you need to stand here in the shoes of the people who did the wrong thing here. Because
right,
that's
and
what the movie's really about.
exactly, and what you're taking in is like there's like, even if it isn't a like it wasn't an arranged marriage between them, like obviously there was sort of an
It,
influence
it,
there,
it
but
was
like
set up, but yeah.
it was set up, but like
Hmm.
when you're married to somebody, like there's like
Yeah, it's more like targeted than arranged. Yeah,
either way,
yeah,
like
yeah.
they've been married,
Hmm.
like she's asked him to make sure that this isn't happening.
Hmm.
Like there's just an implicit trust there that it's going to
Mm-hmm.
take a little bit more to break
Yeah.
than just like, oh, this seems obvious that like
Mm-hmm.
I'm still taking bad medicine. But like the fact that he's facilitating that, like
Mm-hmm.
that was a trail that she wasn't ready for, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think too that maybe part of it is just recognizing in the same way that he is able to be a loving husband, or at least apparently, when he's there with her. And I say apparently because I suspect that it was sincere in those moments, and yet he just happened to be the sort of person that does not connect the dots between that and when his uncle suggests that he join a group of guys who are going to go beat the crap out of another Osage in the woods, right? He in his mind he thinks those are unrelated.
Yep.
And the fact that Robert De Niro's character, even though he is masterminding so much of this stuff, his public persona is very friendly and genial and affectionate, even. And so it's just a recognition that, like, it is easy in mass media to try to paint the villains of these types of stories as irredeemable monsters that you can tell there's something wrong with them. They're the bad ones, and we can recognize them on sight because they're bad and they do bad things. It's never complicated, right?
Early in their
Yeah,
there's like,
exactly.
no,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
tie the fuselage to the railroads.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, just to run through the nominations here, uh, Killers of the Flower Moon had 10 total. It was nominated for Best Film Editing. Um, so, editing, costume design, cinematography, production design, original song for, I'm going to do my best with the word here, is Wazee, which translates for a song for my people. Robbie Robertson for original score, and Robert De Niro as Best Supporting Actor, Lily Gladstone as Best Actress, Martin Scorsese as Best Director, and then, of course, Best Picture. It was the third most nominated movie. Oppenheimer was the first, and then Poor Things edged it out for second just by having 11 instead of 10 nominations. Also a really good movie. So if you can see that one, you should, so we can talk about it. But in the meantime, anyone watching this stream will know that we have our Saturday night game stream that's going to be starting before too long. So we're going to cut this episode short, but we'll be back to talk about more Oscar-nominated movies. Did you have anything else you wanted to finish with before I kind of just rolled right into the end there?
Yep, all
Okay,
good.
great. So we'll be back to discuss more Oscar-nominated movies, and in the meantime, watch good movies. They don't have to be Oscar-nominated, but they can be. All right. Good night.
Good night.